Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 10th webinar in the PIBC Peer Learning Network webinar series. I'm Heather Cower, a member of PIBC's Housing Task Force, which oversees the Peer Learning Network program. My day job is Director of Community Planning with the City of Abbotsford. I want to acknowledge that I am hosting this webinar in Abbotsford today, located on the unceded and traditional lands of the Stalo, Sumas, Matsqui, and Lekomo peoples. As you join this webinar from all points in British Columbia, the Yukon, and beyond, please take the opportunity to reflect and acknowledge the truth of the lands in which you live, work, and enjoy. We have over 300 registrants. I'm sure that has nothing to do with the fact that you may be needing credits. I'm sure that you're really, and I know that that's true for some of you because you're not PIBC members, and we really appreciate you joining us. If this is the first time joining a PLN webinar, welcome. If you're a repeat customer, thank you for tuning in. PIBC is solely responsible for designing and delivering the Peer Learning Network program. We're thankful for the province of BC making a one-time contribution to PIBC for this effort. PIBC's Housing Task Force was formed at the outset of the Peer Learning Network back in January of 2024. Just speaking as one member of the task force, I'm very proud of the service that PIBC has been able to deliver, from in-person sessions throughout the province in the early days, an online discussion forum with over 200 members, and now hosting our 10th webinar that is free and open to all planners and practitioners working in the housing space or interested in this subject matter. As Ray mentioned in the last couple of webinars, PIBC is undertaking some interesting research that will be delivered to you in early 2026, and I'll have more to say about one of those initiatives later on. Like many of you, my team and I at the City of Abbotsford have been knee-deep in the weeds of understanding and complying with all of the provincial housing legislation that was enacted over the past couple of years. The name of the game is proactive planning for more housing. The next big deadline, as we know, is December 31st, 2025, when all affected local governments must have updated their OCPs and zoning bylaws consistent with their housing needs assessments. Excuse me. In the case of Abbotsford, we're very close to the finish line with our new OCP, which we're calling Abbots Forward 2050. While we're all hopefully seeing the light at the end of the tunnel regarding this current effort, we all know that once the OCP and zoning bylaw is adopted, that's when the real work begins to facilitate and guide development decisions so that more housing is built in our communities. And we know that the housing legislation doesn't reduce the level of effort that we must continue to make just to deliver more affordable housing. Whether it's low end of market rental, non-market housing, co-op housing, supportive housing, the demand for housing on the entire housing continuum is still there and hasn't abated since the various pieces of legislation were enacted. And this is a focus for today's webinar. How do we ensure that this new era of proactive planning can accommodate affordable housing? I'm going to ask our panelists to turn on their cameras so that I can do some introductions. We've got Marina Jozipovic, I'm trying to pronounce that correctly, and Mikayla Tinsley from the Metro Vancouver Regional District. We've got Erika Sagert from the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, Lilian Chau from Entre Nous Femmes Housing Society, and Timothy Luk from Young Anderson, and our resident lawyer today. If you haven't done so, you can browse our speakers' bios on the webinar registration page. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance. We're going to cover as many of your questions as possible over the next 80 or so minutes. My colleague Raymond Kahn will be monitoring the chat box and Q&A box. Please feel free to submit new questions, and we'll try to get some of them if we have time. To help guide the conversation today, Ray has posted into the chat box the outline of the webinar. So first we have our first presentation, which is new tools and resources for planners and practitioners. Presentation 2 will be strategic perspectives about the community housing sector. And then we're going to have reflections about affordable and community housing in the era of proactive planning, followed by panel Q&A. And finally, I just wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on PIBC's YouTube channel. Before we jump right into it, because we've got a federal budget dropping tomorrow, we thought we would talk a little bit about that, just get some hot takes on that. So I want to go around the screen and ask each of our panelists to give your hot take about the federal budget. Could you briefly describe the one thing you want to see in the budget with respect to affordable housing or housing in general? And I'm going to start with Erika.
Hi, thanks, Heather. I think we're all going to say something very similar, but I think the eyes are all going to be on Build Canada Homes and what's coming out on that front. I speak a little bit about it in my presentation, but it's really all I'm looking for.
Awesome. How about you, Lilian?
Yeah, I was on the CIP policy group that was asked to actually make some comments about kind of housing policy, etc. So one of the things that really came out was that, I certainly hope, and I think the sector hopes, that there is something to address core housing needs in Canada and in BC and everywhere. Core housing needs, the deeply affordable piece, that's about 12.5% in BC that people are facing inadequate, unaffordable, or not suitable housing. And you really can't address that without some sort of government intervention. So I'm really keen to look at if that budget's going to have some real capital dollars to address that piece. And then my second piece, it's about new infrastructure money for municipalities. You can't sustain growth without actually investing in somewhat failing, aging infrastructure. And so I'm hoping that there'll be something there as well.
Thanks. Over to you, Marina.
Thanks, and Mikayla and I collaborated so that we would only have one response for Metro Vancouver. Just really echoing the things that have been shared. I don't want to repeat those things. I think from a regional perspective, we're also really interested to see what resourcing for infrastructure is coming online with housing, for both housing in general and for housing, affordable housing in particular. This is something we've had a lot of discussions and a lot of concerns about in this region, and I don't think we're the only ones. So we're really looking to see what comes there.
Thank you. So Timothy, what are your thoughts?
I feel like I never have any hot takes. They're always just like cold reactions. I would just be echoing what everyone else is saying. I'm quite curious about this Build Canada Homes getting back, federal government getting back into the game of affordable housing. Would be very interesting.
All right, thank you. Thanks. Excited to see what will happen. All right, so now on to the presentations. Marina and Mikayla from Metro Vancouver will present some new tools and resources that the regional district has developed to support planners and practitioners. Other folks can turn their cameras off while they're doing their presentation. And while these resources are tailored for communities in Metro Vancouver, they may provide inspiration to other communities elsewhere in BC to do something similar. So excited to see this one. And over to you, Marina and Mikayla.
Thanks so much, Heather. Give me a moment to share on my screen here. So my name is Marina. Mikayla joins me here. We're part of the housing policy and planning team at Metro Vancouver. And like Heather introduced, we wanted to share some tools and resources that, of course, we're focused on our members here at Metro Vancouver, but we think that there's a lot of applicability or value for some of you working outside of the region or maybe even other parts of the country. For those of you that are not as familiar with Metro Vancouver, we are a federation of 23 member jurisdictions representing over 3 million residents, which is over half of BC's population. We're an extremely diverse set of communities, everything from large to medium-sized cities, all the way to villages and towns. And the tools that we create at Metro Vancouver are intended to be valuable for a range of community sizes and typologies. So we think that there's, a lot of value in sharing this, and that as always, learning from each other when it comes to housing policy, especially around affordable housing. Metro Vancouver plays two key roles in regional housing policy, as well as actually building and delivering affordable rental units, which makes us pretty unique in the province. I'll just share very briefly about Metro Vancouver Housing. It was established in the early 1970s, responding to affordable rental gaps at that time. And now we've grown to a portfolio of about 3,400 affordable rental units, with an additional 2,000 new and redeveloped units coming online over the next 10 years, making us one of the largest affordable rental providers in Metro Vancouver, and we have a regional scope. The other role we play is in regional housing policy, which includes a variety of activities. We facilitate forums on housing issues. I mentioned we have 23 member jurisdictions, so creating forums for knowledge sharing, court policy coordination, learning is a really important role that we play. We also develop research and advocacy approaches around key housing issues that are coming out of those forums. And we coordinate with our members on regional housing goals, such as those in the Regional Growth Strategy, Metro 2050. I wanted to introduce the kind of 3 initiatives we'll be talking about today. And I think Mikayla, if she hasn't already, will be sharing some links in the chat so you could have access to those either as we go along or after the session. We have 2 research reports that have come out of our Housing 2050 project, which I'll introduce. And we wanted to share some online tools around housing policy that we think are pretty useful and great for learning, great for even policy development, but around that building capacity in understanding affordable housing policy and the tools that local governments and planners have available to them. The first one is the Housing 2050 project. So Metro 2050 is our regional growth strategy, and for the first time includes a goal focused on housing. And we're currently working on a project called Housing 2050, a roadmap to implement Metro 2050's housing goal. This work is really focused on how we're collaborating as a region to advance affordable rental supply in particular. And we have 2 deliverables that have recently been published. The first is the Regional Housing Needs Report. So all of our members have their own housing needs report, but what we've done is we've consolidated them and created a regional and sub-regional snapshot of housing needs in relation to housing delivery to help us understand, what's happening in the region overall, recognizing that housing pressures don't stop at municipal boundaries. The second research report that's been published is the Affordable Housing Gap Analysis, where we took a deep dive into affordable rental gaps in particular. So the housing needs report is our overall housing needs, where the Affordable Housing Gap Analysis zooms in on how much affordable rental do we need and how much are we actually delivering. So the table here provides a snapshot. We broke affordable rental down into affordability level based on local incomes. And we collected information from CMHC, BC Housing, and our members to understand how much affordable rental we're actually developing in the region. That was not an easy data exercise. I'm sure some of you know how challenging it is to get information around affordable rental delivery, all the different definitions and timelines we all use. But what this does is it gives us a snapshot of how we're doing in relation to our need. We know we're playing catch up. We know a lot of progress has been made in recent years. We know we're still playing catch up to historic underinvestment in this segment of the housing system, but we think this work is a really valuable framework for us collectively to understand where are we starting from and how much work do we still have to do when it comes to addressing the affordable rental housing gap. With that, I'm going to shift to a resource we have for a particular type of housing policy tool. Before I pass it over to Mikayla. The second resource I'm highlighting here is the Metro Vancouver Inclusionary Housing Calculator. And it's very particular for those who might be exploring density bonusing and inclusionary zoning in your community. As I just set up my screen share to show you how it works, I just want to highlight that this is intended to be an educational tool, not just for planners. It could be for other types of policymakers, elected officials, even residents, for communities exploring inclusionary housing policies, recognizing these are very complex policies and understanding both the opportunities and constraints might not be super intuitive to different stakeholders and audiences. So this tool was created to both build capacity among planners and help those other decision makers or those involved better understand how inclusionary housing works. So I'll do a very brief demo, but I hope if this is of interest, you'll access the link and play around with it after the session. So you open the link, it gives you a link to the report, which was very detailed analysis on best practices and feasibility of this policy tool that Metro Vancouver conducted and completed in 2024. This study forms the basic analysis that underpins this tool. So if you are interested in those details, please read the report. As you get into the tool, you have options of creating different types of scenarios to test inclusionary housing policy. We've divided the region into 3 markets based on sales prices. It's meant to be a simplified analysis. It can't replace pro forma detailed financial feasibility analysis, but it does allow a user to experiment and test inclusionary housing and different levers within a realistic scenario. So in this demo, I'm going to click a higher price market because that's where I'm located today. It also allows you to select the density or the typology of the project you're looking at. So just for this initial demo, I'm going to hit mid-rise condo. You can click on take a quick tour to find out in more detail how the tool works. Today, I'll click enter my new project. So what you can see here is the tool allows the user to play with a number of different variables used in inclusionary housing policy to create a test scenario and to experiment with different policy tools you might use to support feasibility. There's some pre-programmed variables. For example, it assumes 10% affordable units. And on the right here, you can see that it will tell you whether the project meets basic feasibility or not. And depending on the project, the starting point may or may not be feasible, depending on the market and the project typology. I won't go into all the variables, but one of the neat things that you can do is play around with different incentives. These are some of the most important tools that planners have to make these projects more or less feasible. And the user can play around with these different types of incentives to see what makes a project more feasible in a particular scenario. So we hope that's of use to some of you exploring inclusionary housing policy tools. I'm going to stop sharing and pass it to Mikayla, who will share our third resource.
Thanks, Marina. Hi, everyone. I'm Mikayla Tinsley, Senior Policy and Planning Analyst at Metro Vancouver. So I'm just going to share here. Okay. Is that working? Marina, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, so this is the Measures for Affordable and Diverse Housing dashboard. It's a resource with information on existing municipal policies and bylaws in the Metro Vancouver region that seek to address housing affordability or housing diversity. This resource is intended to make policy information more readily available to practitioners and researchers and foster peer learning among our member jurisdictions. So I'm going to give some very brief background as to why we decided to develop this tool and then take you all for a quick tour of the dashboard. So as part of Metro Vancouver's role as a regional forum for member jurisdictions, we often get questions like, hey, we're working on a standards of maintenance bylaw. Can you tell me what other communities have a bylaw like this? So to respond to these kinds of inquiries more efficiently, we scanned the bylaws and policies of member jurisdictions in the region, and we compiled information on 22 policy areas. Once we had all that data, we asked member jurisdiction staff to verify, and then we worked together with IT to develop a user-friendly dashboard in Power BI. So here's the current version of the dashboard. So this is the landing page. It has some summary information like the number of policies we have on record for each municipality, the number of policies we have in each of the policy categories. And then at the top here, there's these boxes that highlight policies that were amended or adopted since the last calendar year. So under the detailed view, we can look at, for instance, housing diversity and look at, for instance, one category, accessible and adaptable housing policies. So for each policy category, we have a chart with detailed information. So each row is one municipal policy. You can see there's the policy name, and under that policy name, there is a link so you can read the actual policy document. And then we also have more detailed information, which will vary depending on the policy category. So for adaptable housing, for instance, you can see, does the municipality have a requirement for a minimum number of adaptable units in new buildings? So that's what we have in the dashboard. It's quite in depth. And we will be updating this on a regular basis. We are in discussion with member jurisdiction staff to make sure that it stays current. And we're working also to better integrate in our website. So you may, next time you look at it, it might look different. It will continue to have the same functionality, but it will be easier to view on mobile after we've made those changes, which should be by the end of the year. Yeah, of course, each community is unique, but there's also shared challenges across communities. So there's a lot to learn from each other. We regularly hear feedback that this is one of our most useful resources for anyone working on housing policy. In this era of proactive planning, planners are so busy, and so we really need these kinds of resources to help make our work more manageable. Thanks so much, everyone. We're really happy to be able to share these resources with you. We think they'll be useful if you work in the Metro Vancouver region, but even if you don't, we hope you take a look and that we can learn from each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Marina and Mikayla. We do have a couple of questions that popped up in the chat, and so I think we'll pose those questions real quick before we move on to the next presentation. So the first question is, for the Metro Vancouver Inclusionary Housing Calculator, how are the financial inputs like market rent, sales price, et cetera, determined and inputted?
Thanks for the question. So the inputs, the report that I mentioned at the beginning of the demo provides quite a lot of information on the different variables and that we used, including where we got average market rents, home sale prices, etc. In the tool itself, there's quite a few question boxes or read more, so you could find information about particular variables that way. In general, we use things like CMHC market rents, home sales prices. When it comes to development cost charges, we looked at local DCCs, et cetera. So all of the variables are based on real data. It is important to remember that they're averages for the market. So they're not particular to a specific community. It's not meant to get at that really nuanced level of a particular neighborhood or municipality. It is based on those three markets that I introduced, but it is grounded in real data. The variables are updated annually. So we actually just completed our update for this year. So it's based on data that was available as of spring, summer of this year, including, for example, the Altus construction guide, CMHC rental data, and other variables like that. And we are aiming to update it each year with available data. Again, it won't be as current as if you were doing your financial feasibility for a particular policy in this moment, but it is pretty reasonable scenarios for exploring inclusionary housing in our context. Heather, you're muted.
Thanks for that. So I think that's it for the immediate questions. So we'll move along to our next presentation. And for the next presentation, we've got Erika from BC NPHA. She's going to give us a big picture view of the state of the community housing sector in BC, a look into what's happening at the federal level and the opportunities and challenges that she's seeing. Take it away, Erika.
Thanks, Heather. Let me just get my screen shared here. Can folks see that okay? Somebody on the call, let me know. All good? Okay. Fantastic. Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this webinar today. My name is Erika Sagert. I'm the Director of Sector Capacity at BC Nonprofit Housing Association. And really what I've been asked to do today is to talk pretty high level about what the association and the community housing sector is paying attention to in housing right now, just to give a little bit of context to the planners out there who are, through your jobs day to day, trying to come up with housing solutions for your communities. This is really what our sector is seeing. And so, yeah, really, really happy to be here. I should also say I'm a planner by trade, so nice to be with like-minded folks. So just to start by acknowledging that I'm calling in today from the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. BCMPHA is a province-wide organization, so our members and our work takes place across the territories and lands of more than 200 First Nations in BC. I have a few things to get through. This is a long list, but some of these pieces will be pretty quick. So I'll start by talking a little bit about BC nonprofit, a little bit about the sector, and then I want to touch very briefly on where we're at in terms of the housing crisis. Great to have just seen Metro Vancouver and Marina speak to their gaps analysis. We have our own study from the provincial election last year, which I'll talk about very briefly, and then we'll dig into kind of updates. So from the community housing perspective, what shifts are we seeing from senior levels of government? Why does that matter? And really, what is helpful for folks on this call to know? I'll end a little bit with what I've seen as some local government wins, and I'll talk a little bit about regional difference just at the end, as I know folks are calling in from all over the province today. So about BC Nonprofit, we are the provincial umbrella organization that represents nonprofit housing here in BC. We were formed in 1993, and we started with a nonprofit getting in a Winnebago and driving across the province, knocking door to door to form one association. And we have been very strong advocates for the sector, my biased opinion. And since our inception, there's about 45 of us, and we represent 533 members, 345 of which at the moment are nonprofit housing providers directly. About the sector, we advocate more broadly, obviously, for the entirety of the nonprofit housing sector in BC. These numbers are high level and a little bit loose, but generally speaking, there's about 1,200 nonprofit providers across the province, operating well over 100,000 units of long-term affordable housing and about 3,000 buildings. So very quickly, just talking about the ongoing crisis, why are we here today and why is there so much interest? I know there's been a lot of shifts in your jobs when it comes to legislation and the demands on municipalities, but we're also talking about something that's ongoing, very present, very real for a lot of people across the province and across the country. These headlines, I update this slide every year. It has not changed in my 10 years at BCMPHA. The face of it has shifted. BC has seen a lot of things shift since 2017, but the reality is we still have a very severe housing crisis that touches households from community to community. This is Canadian, this is census data, so it's feeling a little bit out of date at this point, but this is from our Canadian Rental Housing Index. And the reason I wanted to include it is when we talk about that higher level need that we're seeing here in BC, I think it's really important to remember that there are, 250,000 renter households as per the last census that were spending more than affordable levels on their rent and utilities, and 105,000 of those, so 16%, were at risk of homelessness by spending more than 50% of their rent of their income on rent and utilities. So again, when we're talking about the housing crisis in BC, I think we've seen a lot of shifts. We've seen a lot of things get added to community. There's been a lot of pressure for folks from all pockets of folks that are kind of fighting this fight to try and address the housing crisis. But the reality is the scope and the scale is still absolutely massive. And so there's just a little bit more when we talk about the kind of need in the sector. One of the other pieces beyond just folks who are certainly not spending sustainable levels on their rents, we're also losing affordable housing stock. We can talk about it through a couple different lenses. This is just one of them. So there's a concept that folks on the webinar might be familiar with called naturally occurring affordable housing units. So this is really just folks that are renting in the private market who, by virtue of being in their units for a long period of time, often are renting at lower rates than those units would go for today. This stock is aggressively being eroded in most communities. So just in this period of time here with census data, we saw that there was almost 100,000 units renting below $1,000 that were lost in communities. So really an important metric to keep in mind. We're also seeing, as there's expiry of operating agreements and various shifts going on within the community housing sector itself, we're also losing some of the units that are renting at and affordable rents, or nonprofits are unable to turn over those units. So that can be a struggle for nonprofits who are trying to not only expand their portfolio, but sustain the units that they do have. So a lot of need out there, and the stock that we do have that's serving people is also being eroded. So a couple things, I know Brian Clifford is on the call, so hello, Brian, these next slides are from you. So just to look, how did we get here, right? One thing that's important to note, and this will become clearer as I go through my presentation, but really important to just take a moment to remind ourselves of a thing that everybody is very aware of, I would imagine on the call, with decades of underinvestment from senior levels of government, particularly with the federal government pulling out of the housing game back in the 90s, we are dealing with a generational issue. There has been underinvestment for decades in Canada when it comes to affordable housing, and we are still feeling that. This creation of backlog for unmet housing need is leaving communities extremely vulnerable to rising costs. And as we're trying to add supply to our communities, we are dealing with a generational crisis, and we're still really struggling to build our way out of it. The housing crisis is most certainly systemic, and market forces alone, can't help us deliver the affordable housing that we need. And this is really important when I talk a little bit more about what the federal government is stepping in to try and do, and also what we're seeing from the provincial side of things as well. So just looking, this is a slide for nonprofit investment from the province of BC. So you can see sort of when the province stepped in to pick up some of the slack from the federal government as of the 90s, and really seeing that bigger investment and shift after 2017. So again, just a really quick slide to illustrate why this is so important and so critical. There's a direct impact on rents when we talk about senior levels of government investing. I really do feel for planners and for elected officials. You are the folks that have people showing up at your door who feel the housing crunch most viscerally, and kind of are more than happy to express that to you in a lot of situations that I see. But the reality is, when we're talking about delivering buildings in community where rents are affordable to those who live locally, we really do need those senior dollars to make that happen. And as we've sort of had this, government attention ebb and flow over the years after a lack of attention, it just becomes something that we really need to keep our eye on. And it just also shows the complexity of what it takes to make a project work today. We have Lilian on the call who can speak a lot more eloquently and directly to the impact that this has on nonprofit housing providers and their ability to do their work. It is a lot of moving and shaking that takes place to get rents into community that are affordable, and it really is an all hands on deck experience. So where are we now? We've established there's a crisis. We know that we need senior level of government. This is just a report from the province of BC, from the government, of just sort of what has been delivered since 2017, with this new focus from BC trying to, create a dent in this major gap that we've had in housing investment. You can see really, I often just on this slide focus on the left. So 32,000 units of housing, many of which are just under construction or still in progress. And this is a little bit out of date as of now as well. But just looking that we are trying to build and deliver affordable housing here in BC. And I have to say, having just come back from Ontario last week, we've had a lot of shifts in the province, and it's created a lot of work for you folks who are in planning departments across BC to try and address the housing crisis. But I think we're extremely lucky to have had some of that attention, because we are one of the unique provinces in that we are actually we have seen investment in recent years into the sector. But we still have a lot to do. So this is just another way of, interesting to compare and contrast to Marina and the Metrovan folks and the gaps analysis that they did for the provincial election last year. BC MPHA did an update to our affordable housing plan for BC. So our analysis really is just focusing on households making less than 50K per year. And we determined that we need at least 125,000 affordable homes over the next decade, including about 5,000 supportive housing units at a cost of $6.7 billion annually, which is an investment to be shared across senior levels of government, and sort of based on the assumption that municipalities are pulling every lever within their toolboxes to make this work too. So moving along to the federal government, Build Canada Homes, this is what we're all looking at. This is what we're all wondering about. We've had a series of announcements over the last few months. Many of the details with Build Canada Homes are still up in the air, and it'll be very interesting to see what unfolds tomorrow, but also over the next few months. The key features from what we understand is that it'll be a standalone federal entity. It's initially been announced that there'll be about $13 billion that'll flow through this entity. There's an interesting overlap with CMHC and the Affordable Housing Fund, but the focus has been, clearly articulated as non-market, deeply affordable housing, including $1 billion to be focused directly on transitional and supportive housing. I saw Anna Bailao speak last week, who's the new CEO for this entity, and will be speaking at our Housing Central conference in a couple weeks. But through this entity, we're seeing a lot of things shift. We're seeing the federal government come back to the table, really recognizing the role of nonprofit housing providers in the community housing sector overall, including co-ops, in delivering solutions for Canadians when it comes to affordable housing. Like I said, there's still a lot of question marks. Some of the initial tools and approaches that they've announced, again, this might be familiar to folks on the call, and I only have maybe slightly more insights than some people here. There's a lot of rumors floating around about what'll be happening when it comes to Build Canada Homes, but we know there'll be a focus on public lands. There's already been announcements of 6 pilot sites, none of which are in BC, given we have a different we don't have the same level of federal lands available here. There's a focus on modern construction methods. We watched the language kind of pivot from just modular to this broader concept of modular construction. So definitely a focus on pace and innovation. We see flexible financing being talked about a lot. So trying to correct some of the challenges that the community housing sector has faced with past programs. In terms of early commitments and actions, so there's the 6 pilot sites. There's also been talk about a Canadian Rental Protection Fund, and they're long through the process of interviewing folks and trying to get that entity set up. So modeling a little bit about the Rental Protection Fund here in BC, and we're hoping to see those programs work together as seamlessly as possible, recognizing that we're asking 2 senior levels of government to work together, which is not an easy thing to do, as we have seen. And also that $1 billion that I mentioned for supportive and transitional housing. When it comes to the community housing sector, I think there's a lot of different things that we're looking at. I would love to hear, Lilian, what you're particularly looking at with this one. But for me, I know I have a lot of questions around the portfolio approach that's being talked about. So there's been, 300 plus units floated around. For me, that brings up a lot of questions around smaller nonprofit providers who are serving smaller communities. How are they able to access these funds? What is that going to look like? Is there sort of an implicit understanding around partnership and consolidation in the sector? I'm not sure. But we know that what the federal government has articulated is that they want folks to even start right now, send in your proposals. Let's just take a look. What does this look like? And so from this sort of language around a portfolio, interesting to hear how that's going to unfold. The other piece I'd say we're looking a lot at when it comes to Build Canada Homes is just this project by project assessment. So obviously in the sector, we're quite used to programs and streams and seeing, this is a call for proposals. This is what we're looking at. Put in your, applications by this date, or if it's a rolling call. Now we're seeing that it's more going to be a portal is what's being talked about. And it seems like they're looking for submissions sooner rather than later. So I know the community housing sector across Canada is really trying to figure out what do we get in, what are they looking for, and how, really the mechanisms that we might have used in the past to be successful in accessing funding. This might look a little bit different. So still a lot of questions when it comes to Build Canada Homes, and a lot to look for. Interesting to see that really that federal focus has zeroed in on housing, and that it's zeroed in on the community housing sector to be a key partner. That's been really encouraging. And it is great to have this opportunity. But like I said, there's going to be, the devil will be in the details a lot when it comes to this. So we'll be keeping a very close eye on how this unfolds, and folks can sign up to BCMPHA's newsletter because we are releasing as regular information as we can about this. And like I said, Anna will be there to speak to delegates at our Housing Central conference. So on to the province really quickly on this piece. I think the thing to get across, we're talking about all of these different planning shifts. I know that's so relevant for folks on this call. When it comes to the community housing sector, if we're really just looking at investments and shifts in attention in housing, I think there's certain things that have become pretty clear. We have the last call for the Community Housing Fund. This program has delivered a lot of units here across BC. It is a mixed income model where we're looking at some of those higher income folks helping to subsidize some of the lower renting units in the buildings. This has been met, I would say, with quite a mixed experience by providers. There are some communities where the low end of market units, folks are really struggling to fill them. There are others where that is not the case at all. Generally, we know that anyone who is on the wait list for deeply affordable housing, so units that are really renting at those low rates, that has not waned at all. Though those wait lists are, the pressure for those units and the need for those units are very clearly required across the province. So we're seeing that. You also have BC Builds, so some updated information there on BC Builds and the commitment through that program. Again, really delivering units for higher income households, like those incomes. We're looking at serving folks who are, making that higher level, and therefore the rents that they can pay. When we compare these two programs and we're looking at the province overall, I think something that the association is keeping their eye on is how are we really delivering units? And this speaks back to what Lilian said about the budget. How are we delivering new units for folks with really low incomes? It's not really clear through these projects that we're able to meet the need in that sense. And especially considering we have the last committed dollars for the Community Housing Fund, I think that's something that we'll be keeping an eye on in a big way as we move forward into next year. Just a couple updates from the Union of BC Municipalities conference. To me, this was a week where I got a really good sense of where the province was at with some of these pieces. And I think the things that came across really clearly was that BC is perceived as being in a very tight financial reality. And so I feel like we're getting signals from the province that there'll be less of the levels of investment that we've seen in the past. And that to me came in very big contrast with the level of need that was being expressed by delegates attending UBCM. We're hearing from municipalities across BC that folks are struggling in their communities. They need more housing, they need more services, they need those infrastructure dollars, and it's a little bit unclear how those needs are going to be met when we're hearing a lot of language around balancing the budget and kind of dealing with some of the deficit here in BC. Like I said, it was also clear that there was no more funding announcements or anything. There was no big announcements around housing, and as EB was addressing the crowd, housing wasn't really a focus of his speech, so that stood out to me. And the last thing I would say, which is of interest probably to folks on this call too, is the conversation in BC around housing has often kind of focused on public safety. And we're seeing this sort of conflation of street disorder and housing solutions. It makes it very hard for nonprofit housing providers to get communities delivered effectively to get housing delivered effectively into communities. When we're seeing this kind of pushback and this focus on public safety rather than the broader needs and the broader approach of the sector overall. Just landing on these local government wins. So I sort of structured this in there's three examples that I wanted to point out. This is from a planning perspective. I just happened to be on a webinar very recently with the city of Penticton, so I thought this was a good one to bring up. So an example of really where we're seeing proactive planning and a community going above and beyond to collaborate with the nonprofit housing sector. They did receive a grant to do some of this work. It's an asset-based community development approach, really looking to identify the most current need for affordable housing in Penticton, develop partnerships among organizations who have that kind of vision, mission, and values alignment. And a really good example, if any, I won't go into too much detail, but for folks to check out to see kind of what it looks like to take what's required of you and really take it as many steps above and beyond as you can to ensure that the planning that's being done locally is really trying to meet the needs and build the partnerships that are necessary to really start to implement effective solutions once they come into play. I also wanted to point to a project that has been a big success. So I just toured this recently, so it was very top of mind for me. It's a mix of supportive housing and affordable rentals in Victoria, Burnside Road. It's a really beautiful building. There's a daycare that will be on site. There's other commercial space there, and it's a mix of different bedrooms. And when we were touring the supportive housing building, there were multiple folks having a birthday. So that was really exciting to see 3 people celebrating within the supportive housing building, but a really good example of a new building that's been delivered quite successfully, and also a good reminder of what it actually takes to make something like that a reality. So you can see the list on the bottom of my screen there. That's everyone that had to contribute to make this project work. Many years to come to fruition and a wonderful asset to the community, but all the various pieces that need to come into alignment really to deliver affordable housing. Also just on the acquisition side, so the rental protection fund still has a little bit of funds left. This is a project by Brightside Community Homes. So addressing that kind of erosion of existing stock that we have, seeing these wins kind of delivered throughout BC through the rental protection fund, which is really wonderful. The really palpable relief for tenants who are in these buildings is really exciting. And then my very last slide, as I know I'm at time, BC is not uniform. So I think, as we're joined here today by people from all over the province, it's really important to remember that communities are not experiencing the housing crisis in the same way. When some folks are struggling with certain units to get delivered or certain units to get filled, for others, it's not the case. That makes it very interesting from a planning perspective and from, communities trying to address the crisis. You can also see that what's being delivered in community, this is a tool that we put together a while ago around for a different election campaign. On the bottom, those 3 graphs that you can see, but really just when we're visualizing what's actually being delivered into community, it's not equal. There's a really big mix of the kind of housing that's being delivered in communities across BC. The need is not uniform either, but it is certainly across the province. And then we're seeing a very big mix of how it's being addressed. So just an important note, it's wonderful to see tools that, like Metro Vancouver has put together, but recognizing that things are very different for different folks, and that makes coming up with a uniform approach to solving the housing crisis really difficult. And it takes a lot of learning and collaboration across communities to try and figure out what works. And that is it for me. And I'm sorry I went 2 minutes over.
That's okay. That was great information. Really appreciate that. You mentioned the conference that's coming up. And that I think that's November 17th through the 19th. That's the annual BC Nonprofit Housing Association conference. I actually attended that conference last year, and I really felt like the content would be very valuable for planners. And so I would encourage planners to attend this conference or any of the annual conferences that come up. There's a lot of really good content. And I think there's probably still room. I was looking at the website and noticing that registration is still open. So anybody who's still interested. And where is that? Look, is it in Vancouver?
It's at the Sheraton Wall Center. And yeah, we do get a lot of planners, and I just want to recognize that for folks trying to access those Prody dollars, I know it's very difficult. I often hear from folks that I either knew through school or meet through work who would love to come to our conference, and it's very hard to get permission and support from your municipality. So good luck. Please attend if you can. If not, I encourage folks to submit proposals in the spring to come even next year. If you present, then we pay for your day pass. So that can help make it more accessible.
Oh, good to know. Well, and I have sort of inquired about planning credits too. Depending on which sessions you attend, planners might be eligible for some professional credits from PIBC as well. So, so if you're interested, I'm sure reach out to PIBC and we can try to confirm for you, but I highly recommend it. Thank you for that. So on our next on the agenda is we want to get some quick reflections from Lilian and Timothy. So Erika, we can have you shut off your audio, your video if you'd like. And Lilian and Timothy, I am going to start with Lilian. As a registered professional planner and CEO of a nonprofit housing society, you bring a very important lens to this conversation. So could you just share a couple of reflections from what you heard from the presentations? Kind of what were some highlights for you?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yeah, no, I'm really glad that we are having this conversation, and I think there's a wealth of resources and materials and information that's being thrown at everybody today. But these are really important numbers to understand. It's really important to understand the state of affordable housing and who is it impacting or who is it affecting. I think a couple of comments I want to make. I'll kind of go more kind of from a perspective of the nonprofit sector. Obviously, this environment right now is very challenging to navigate. For us to continue to grow the number of affordable housing in this province, we are seeing austerity measures. We're seeing the kind of pulling of funding programs ending, lots of uncertainty around the federal government piece. And for me, it's actually more important than ever to really understand at a local government level where your policies are actually targeting. And so you heard Metro Vancouver talk about the 54,000 units that's required. And you also had Erika talk about the 125,000 over 10 years for folks under $50,000. Even for the Metro Vancouver 54,000, the income level is about under 90,000. So those are the folks that we're talking about. In order to provide affordable housing to those folks in those income ranges, you will require some sort of government intervention. You will require some subsidies in order to provide the level of affordability that's actually affordable to these folks. In contrast, I noticed that there has been more talk, even with the federal program, the Canada Homes, and municipalities have a focus on moderate income housing. And for me, I think that's totally fine. They may not require as much subsidy, but they're not going to be able to provide as much affordability in the number of units. However, one thing I would say is that basically that moderate income housing is now competing with a very soft market rental market. And so actually, it is actually, landlords are actually providing 1 month free rent, 2 months free rent. So if you take a look at that kind of reaction, that means that in the moderate income household renter sector, there is ability for people to move into those markets, those market rents, or they're staying in their current rentals because of the uncertainty in the market. For the folks that we're talking about, that 54,000 or 125,000 households, those folks don't actually have much choice. Right? They actually don't have enough income to actually move into any sort of market unit, even if rents are softening. So I just want to kind of put that out there as a thought process when planners are thinking about, well, what are we targeting? What is affordability? Who is this actually going to impact? Obviously, I'm going to be advocating for folks that are in that lower income range because, quite frankly, there isn't a lot of other levers that people can independently do to get themselves out of that housing crisis. The other thing we're coming across is that we have a number of different partners. Entre Nous Femmes Housing Society, we provide independent housing. So we don't provide supports, we're not transitional, we're not supportive. But we are hearing from supportive housing providers in the sector reaching out to us and asking for units for folks that have actually gone through their supportive housing program or maybe in a transitional housing program, but they're unable to find permanent housing, permanent independent housing that's affordable to them. There is a bit of a bottleneck that is occurring right now. And so what is happening is that people are staying in supportive housing, transitional housing much longer than necessary. And then you have kind of that backflow where then more people are staying in shelters or unable to access shelters, right? So, we kind of have this bit of a backlog that is happening as well. And again, that makes the case for, we really need to focus on creating deeply affordable housing that is actually affordable to a sector of population that's not going to be served by the market. I do want to make a comment on Metro Vancouver's tool, and I thought it was really great to have that chart and kind of show where all the different municipalities and what kind of levers they're using. And what's really interesting is that the ones that had like 3 or 4 municipalities using, so things like having grants for affordable housing, providing land, fast tracking approvals, etc., DCC waivers, those are things I actually wish that more municipalities would actually take on, because those are actually kind of levers that really can make an impact on a project, and for a nonprofit to actually bring an affordable housing project to life, either be able to get access to funding a little bit easier or faster, or able to redevelop some of their own properties as well. And to me, those are actually really great levers to have at the local government level, I think across the province. Not all of these are going to work, especially if you're in a smaller community. You may not have land or a lot of cash for that kind of thing, and there may be other levers that can be done, such as fast tracking approvals, etc. But there's definitely I think out of those 4, those to me are really the key ones that I would love to see local governments act on. One thing I did see that wasn't there, I'm not sure Marina or Mikayla, you can speak to this if this was tracked at all, but I didn't see there, and what I would love to see is consultation with the nonprofit sector. So how many municipalities actually have a formal committee or some sort of way that they're consulting with the nonprofit housing sector and asking about the policies are actually coming down, including the inclusionary zoning policy, right? That might have a direct impact on them if they are the ones meant to take on these units. I think that's one thing that I see a bit missing. If you want to know how a policy is going to work, go chat with the folks that's going to impact the most or have to actually end up working within it. They're going to be able to tell you if that is the appropriate policy for them. And they're also going to be bringing you a wealth of knowledge about the operations of affordable housing, which often isn't considered, right? So, land is not enough for affordable housing anymore. Cash sometimes, definitely is great. But if you think about operating a unit might be between $500 or $650 a month. And that's including all your costs, maintenance, insurance, property taxes, utilities, water, etc. Those costs continue to rise, right? Your property taxes might go up 5%. Your water utilities has actually jumped quite a bit through the last couple of years. And so, but if your inclusionary policy, for example, or other policies are capping rents for that nonprofit, it makes it really challenging for us to actually continue to operate and maintain that level of affordability. It creates actually a lot of financial risk for that operator, and especially if those units don't come with any subsidies. So just something to think about, ask the question if you don't know, hey, is this going to cause you an operational issue? Like, what are some of the challenges there? How much does it cost for you to actually operate these units? Can you sustain this for the next 20 to 30 years that you're going to have these units for, or even longer? Those are questions I think will be great to ask. And lastly, just a quick note on BC and Page A. I do see that I think what you're going to see in the portfolio question, I think, Erika, you mentioned it about, potentially they're only going to provide low interest financing to groups that have like a whole portfolio, and maybe 300 homes is the threshold. Yes, I do think that's going to be somewhat problematic, and it's going to impact different regions of Canada differently. In Ontario, you have smaller numbers of nonprofit housing providers, but they are much larger. So on average, they may have 1,000 units. In BC, we have, 60% of our members, BC and Page A, are operating 10 units to 50 units, right? So the scale is very different. So you may not see as many applications coming in from BC just because there are less larger providers. You may see a lot in Ontario. How do you, equitably spread that out within the country? That's going to be a bit, I think, a big question. I think what it may happen in BC is that you're forcing some amalgamations to occur within the nonprofit sector, which could be a good thing. There's always unintended impacts as well. I think that's something the sector is going to have to look at. But certainly, we know that we need more capital for supportive, transitional, and affordable housing. For supportive and transitional, we are certainly needing some more operating subsidies for those housing projects as well. It's not enough just to build the building and then have people in it. You still need to operate these properly. And for supportive housing, that requires actually a lot of staff a lot of resources and a lot of care. And you definitely need to be well supported in those. So I'm just going to stop here because I know there's other questions happening. And sorry, I'm going to let Timothy chime in on this as well. And Heather, I'll just answer questions later.
Sounds good. Thank you, Lilian. So Timothy, your impressions?
Well, thank you very much for having me here. I think what we've heard so far is really interesting, and I like the idea of communities and local governments, advocates for housing, engaging and talking about what other different interesting policies there are available. I thought I would, something came to mind and I thought I'd share sort of what my role here is often is to assist these parties in bringing or moving through the legal mechanisms to bring about affordable housing. And often I get questions about, we had this idea, can we do it? Are we permitted to do it? Is it feasible within the legal framework? And one that I've been hearing, which I'll share about, is related to security. So these projects, affordable housing, there are numerous components, permits that need to be obtained, and sometimes the obligations, conditions, requirements associated with them can be can weigh on development and its potential to be sustainable. And so we've gotten this question about whether or not different types of security can be obtained. And I guess typically where you get security associated with a permit will be it's cash or a letter of credit. That's what most municipalities, local governments want to see. And I think that's because in part the Community Charter and the Local Government Act specifically say when it comes to security, especially security that can be requested through a bylaw or pursuant to a bylaw, it can be required by the local government. It's the two major options are cash or a letter of credit. And there's a reason why those are the most desirable for a local government. And it's because you're taking security because there's the potential that something is not going to be fulfilled, an obligation is not going to be fulfilled. And where a party, a developer or a property owner, somebody has an obligation to fulfill, if they fail to do that, you can always go back to them. You've got all these legal mechanisms to say, hey, you need to do this and we're going to somehow force you to do it. But that's a lot of work sometimes for local government. So the benefit of security, if you take cash or a letter of credit, is that you can use that to satisfy those obligations. You already know that you've got the money to do it. Now the local government can do it. But there's another type of security. Well, there's another category that the legislation usually permits, and that's another form of satisfactory to council, or in some cases, a person who council has delegated the authority to. And so that other form satisfactory is quite broad. And so we get the question, can we do it? Yes, if council or that designate says you can, I think then you've got the legal authority to do it. Whether you should, that's a policy decision for local governments. And what I like to point out as you consider this is partly what I already stated. The benefit of having cash or a letter of credit on hand is that it becomes it's very useful because you've already got the money. You don't need to haggle with somebody. You don't need to try and extract that from them or get them to do something. You've already got it. It's there to be used. But other forms can be very effective as well. Things to look out for are the terms of those agreements. Think of it kind of like insurance. If you have the money to make yourself whole if something goes wrong, you've already got the money and you can use it. If you're relying on an insurance policy, benefit is you don't have to have the money there, but you're stuck with the terms of that policy. So to these parties, especially local governments, you want to consider what those, so they're often referred to as indemnity letters, are providing. They might be totally satisfactory to your circumstances and something that your council or your designated is willing to accept in order to help get a project over the finish line. They may also, depending on the specific circumstances, be that security is too important. Those conditions need to be, you need to know that you can satisfy them. In that case, the indemnity letters may not be satisfactory.
So you mentioned an indemnity letter. What other forms might those other forms take?
The indemnity letter is typically what we see the most of. So cash, cash is cash. Cash is king. Letters of credit are letters from banks. They're kind of like lines of credit almost. I'm not entirely sure how they always work because I think each bank kind of does it their own way. But effectively, it's a letter from the bank saying that to the holder of the letter that you can extract this amount of money from us. It's ready and available to go. And I think that often means that the party who arranges for that letter of credit has put that level of money in the bank, or the bank is trusting them to pay it off as it is taken out. An indemnity letter is kind of, it's like a promissory note. It's saying we're agreeing to fulfill certain obligations. Other forms, I've heard of other forms in very specific circumstances. I think they're very development dependent, it's really, they're pretty rare, I'd say, outside of as for other forms. But often I find that they usually boil down to some sort of promise. We will do this, and here's your form of security. Just be aware that the farther away you get from actual money that you have immediate access to, the more steps and the harder it might be to make yourself whole.
All right, thank you. All right, I appreciate that. So the next part of our agenda is for the entire panel to come back, and we're gonna pose some questions that we got ahead of time from attendees, and I'm basically gonna throw the questions out, and whoever feels inspired to answer can do so first, and then maybe if other folks on the panel have some things to add, please feel free to do that. So our first question along these lines is, proactive planning as set out by the province is about ensuring official community plans and zoning bylaws are aligned with the jurisdiction's housing needs report. What do you see as on the ground outcomes of that proactive planning? And maybe along those lines, will all of this actually lead to the creation of non-market housing? This is something that our community members, as we've been doing public engagement with our OCP, one of the questions we got a lot was, so what is the OCP going to do about actually creating affordable housing? And my impression is that all of these efforts are aimed at creating housing, more housing units generally, increasing the supply of housing generally, which is also supposed to affect the cost of housing. But what else? What else is it supposed to do? And just kind of curious about the panel's thoughts on that. Anybody want to jump in? Marina?
Maybe start, Heather, just kind of some general thoughts. The way that you just described it, a lot of the recent proactive planning legislation is meant to create a more a regulatory environment, a planning environment that is more conducive to supply overall. It's really not focused on non-market housing generally, though there have been some tools like inclusionary zoning that are more focused on that type of housing. But when it comes to updating OCPs and zoning bylaws to integrate a local government's housing needs report, it's trying to shift towards a better alignment between how much housing supply we need and our local planning environment. At a general level, this should kind of streamline the process, communicate more clearly what will really happen in a community, and hopefully reduce hurdles to housing. I do think it's going to take some time for us to see the full impact. These are not, quick win overnight changes that we're making. Like, we're really changing how we're approaching that connection between planning and housing provincially. When it comes to non-market housing in particular, Lilian, you said it really well. This type of housing needs additional tools. A more supportive environment for housing in general will help non-market housing, because non-market housing is a type of housing, but it needs that extra push, whether it's land, whether it's additional density, capital funding, low-cost financing, fee waivers. It needs that extra push to make it financially feasible, especially if we want to see those deeper levels of affordability. So while there have been these big changes coming from the province that are supposed to support our overall supply question, and over the long term help moderate prices, when it comes to non-market housing, we still need more targeted solutions at all levels of government.
Thanks. Did anybody want to add
think
to that?
I was just going to jump in. I think I would just echo what Marina said and build on it a little bit. It is that key piece that non-market housing is different. And I think kind of focusing on that senior level investment, like, there's only so much that can be done in that kind of planning sphere. And that's what I, was touching on a little bit in my presentation. Like, I do feel for local government and for planners in general, we're trying to create the stage, to help deliver more affordable units into our communities. And that's so important. And it's such a critical step in the process. But the reality is, in those slides that I showed, if you really want those rents to be renting at affordable rates, that's a different step that has to happen. And that's really where it feels like the level of alignment has to really come together. So to me, it's sort of, wherever we're creating something more predictable and transparent in terms of what we're really trying to achieve in our community, like, say, around some of these targets, really helpful, really important to be aligned around a unified idea of where we're trying to get to. But I've been in, I've given presentations and had local elected officials say to me, I need to have X amount of supportive housing units. How do I do that? I feel for those folks, because it's not, you don't just show up to work in the morning and say, okay, I'm on board, I want to do that now. I'm just going to make that happen. There's so many different pieces that need to come together. So just recognizing the challenge of that. And it is great to think that we have, planning as a field that can be an enabler and really a collaborator and a supporter of affordable housing and of nonprofit housing, but just recognizing that there's a lot of other elements that have to come together, which is really, just highlighting that from what Marina said.
I just add to this, Heather, because someone posted in the Q&A as well about proactive planning, and already Stephen here has already asked about, pre-zoning, lower parking requirement, additional tenants, all the above, and is that's going to help more nonprofit housing? I think Erika and Marina already spoke to some of these things, but I do want to focus on the pre-zoning piece. I think that lever is actually quite powerful, and for a number of reasons. One, anything that can expedite your process obviously makes it more attractive to funders, because they want to be able to announce units and have builds as quickly as possible. With the new community housing fund with BC Housing, there is now a timeline of when you must basically start or complete construction when you put in your application. So there are now additional timelines being put on nonprofits to deliver affordable housing through those funding programs. So the pre-zoning process will definitely help. That also helps you with some certainty about what kind of design you're going to be putting in. So kind of save some time, wondering, designing with your architects and your engineers and etc. And so if you have some of those guidelines already, abate with some flexibilities, because each site is quite different. So I would do a bit of caution there. But it does provide the design team to actually move forward with their design a little bit quicker, because they know, okay, we're not testing what zone we're going to, how much density we're going to get in this area. we actually kind of know beforehand. So that cuts down on time. And of course, the no public hearing situation where it is pre-zoned, that is definitely de-risks a project for a nonprofit, especially if you're looking at supportive or other types of housing that might be a bit more controversial in that particular community. I also think it's a great lever because, again, if you're in a smaller community or a community that doesn't have a lot of land, you don't have a lot of cash to provide for affordable housing, this is definitely a lever that any municipality across the province can be taking advantage of in order to assist with their affordable housing developments.
Great, thank you. I mean, I will say, I can hear what some of the municipalities are saying, or thinking about what you just said, which is, of course, we've lost some levers that we had. Pre-zoning property means we've now lost the ability, perhaps, or the ability to get road dedication, for instance, has now moved to the building permit stage. And there's some pros and cons to that. One of them that our engineering department recently brought my way was the fact that developers who do rezonings understand that system, and they're prepared to provide things like road dedication because that's what developers have been doing. The folks who apply for a building permit don't necessarily know that system. They haven't been asked to provide road dedication in the past, or to do some of the servicing agreements that happen at rezoning stage. So that's one of the most recent challenges that we've thought of in terms of just trying to adjust to this new landscape of not having the rezoning process in order to get infrastructure. So just one of my last thoughts on that. So diving a little bit deeper, let's talk about inclusionary zoning a little bit. So inclusionary zoning is a tool that the province has given us in order to help promote more affordable housing. So I'm curious about folks' thoughts on inclusionary zoning generally, how it, on the ground operationally, how it could work. And I'm going to try to narrow down my question here. I mean, how much impact do we think inclusionary zoning will have, and what are some strategies for making it work? I think I'll throw that out there. Anybody want to jump in on that one? Metro Van, you've got an inclusionary zoning tool.
I was going to say,
I was just
Marina,
leaving some space if anyone wanted to jump in first. Erika, do you want to jump in first?
I'll be very quick and I would pass it to you. I firstly just wanted to shout out to Stephen, who I didn't realize was one of the forces behind that Penticton plan that I presented. So always fun to present someone's work back to them. So hi, Stephen, I didn't know you were on the call. And then on inclusionary zoning, I think it really, there's just such a difference in how things are implemented. And we're obviously looking for something that creates a financial reality that actually leads to the kind of development that we're looking for. So I think, Marina, you can definitely speak more to the details, but it kind of brought me back to Lilian's earlier comments of speak to nonprofits. If you're trying to set something up, ensure that it's actually going to land with the folks who are trying to work within that environment. And I know a lot of people do that already, but just kind of emphasizing how critical that is. But Marina, I'm sure you have many thoughts.
Thanks, Erika. It's a really great question. Inclusionary zoning is a new tool, right? We've had density bonusing in various iterations, and I think about half of metro communities as of last year have experimented or used density bonusing, some with a lot of success for getting some level of affordable rental, especially when they were able to offer a lot more density. I think we're still experimenting with how this tool will be used in our new policy environment, especially inclusionary zoning as a more regulatory approach versus continuing to use density bonusing. We are still seeing communities update their existing programs or create new ones, especially in light of changes, for example, transit-oriented areas and how we use inclusionary housing policies in those areas. I think that they can be very successful with the right policy structure, and we have seen this. with good engagement with the financial analysis, with the realities on the ground. That's why Metro Vancouver did that study, to provide kind of a baseline of best practices and insight into feasibility to support the communities of this region, recognizing that each local government will have its own particular context, development context, regulatory context. I will say it's one tool. I don't think it's our, it's the solution. It's one tool, and we need all the tools in the toolbox around affordable housing. We all know this. That's not a new thing to say, but we can treat it as one tool in terms of engaging the private sector to generate affordable rental, creating that more diverse housing mix. I think we also have to be realistic right now that the housing market is not might not be that generative of certain types of housing in general. We are seeing a lot of economic uncertainty, but with tools like inclusionary zoning and density bonusing, we also have to think of them longer term in creating that stable policy environment to communicate to the development sector what we're hoping to see and how they can be a partner and be involved in this process, as well as to the nonprofit sector that may be involved in operations. I don't know if others have other thoughts on inclusionary housing.
Yeah, maybe I'll couple minutes here. Inclusionary zoning, I think, as a medium-sized operator, we operate our portfolio. You want to be able to have an asset, you want to be able to leverage that asset, you want to be able to actually operate this asset appropriately. So any type of inclusionary zoning that allow us to actually have full control over that asset, over that building, would be the more preferred approach. So I would love to get a whole building as part of inclusionary, and that has occurred in different sites. Usually it's a larger, much more dense area. To me, that's the ideal situation as an operator, because I can fully control that. I'm not trying to negotiate with a strata or with a developer for kind of future maintenance things, etc. You can kind of be fully in control. And I also like the cash in lieu option that enable a municipality to take some cash from a developer in lieu of providing inclusionary units that they can then provide to a nonprofit to build an appropriate affordable housing building, etc., or reduce some fees, etc. To me, that is also been quite impactful. It's been a bit challenging to be offered 10 units in a 200 unit building, which often does come aligned sometimes. There's just a number of operational, financial, kind of pieces that makes it a little bit more challenging to do. However, there are nonprofits out there that are looking for more scattered units within a building and within a region, because that's how they operate. And they may have some additional operating dollars through their particular society. So I'm thinking particular community living organizations, right? They want their folks to be living in community. They have an actual funding model for operating. So that's a little bit different. So as Erika and I had mentioned, it's not a one size fits all. And, if there is some flexibility within that policy, that can actually maybe be suitable for a larger number of nonprofits, then I think that would be a really successful inclusionary zoning policy.
Great, thank you. Any additional thoughts from anyone on that? All right, I'm going to jump to a question about housing delivery and who pays for it. Local governments are increasingly dabbling in direct delivery of purpose-built rental housing delivery, the Burnaby Housing Authority being the latest one to get off the ground. The City of Vancouver recently tried to get one off the ground, but was voted down by council. Beyond local governments, you have TransLink establishing its own for-profit housing development arm. Given the opportunity to leverage its own public lands, should local governments and TransLink or other entities have a duty to maximize non-market housing opportunities? Or should they entertain revenue generation as an objective? And does it matter as long as housing is built overall? What are some thoughts on that? Anybody want to start?
I can start with some messy thoughts. I feel like I'm still trying to wrap my head around of some of these pieces, just as they've been unfolding and in the last few years here in BC. I think what comes to mind for me is just the sort of political risk and shifting priorities of municipalities doing this work. There's a difference between a nonprofit who is mission driven, typically maintaining this long-term social mandate, which is insulated from political cycles. And then so we see sort of housing coming through municipalities. It's a very different environment. And the way that also shows up is around operational expertise with, a lot of nonprofits having decades of experience in community really doing this work. And so I understand the drive and the feeling of, what's within the municipality's control and the feeling that you can do more with it and you can kind of be active in this space. I think there are a lot of considerations for sort of who is doing the work of housing and community. And I obviously, being with a nonprofit housing association, might be a little bit biased on who I think should be doing certain kinds of work. So it's an interesting and kind of evolving space. So that's all I say. Those are sort of my messy high level thoughts, but there are definitely advantages of nonprofit housing providers doing this work as they have been doing.
Yeah. Any additional thoughts on that?
I'll jump in here. I think, again, in a provincial wide, if we look at it, step back and look at it from a provincial lens, I think there is value in a district or a local government go in creating their own housing authority, especially if you're in a community that might not have a lot of nonprofit housing providers or folks that don't do a lot of housing. So to me, that's kind of a gap that, would make sense to step in. I think it makes a little bit less sense when you're in a really urban area and you've got a huge variety and diversity of nonprofits that are already doing this work and doing it well. And now you're going to be competing with them on resources and various things. At Entre Nous Femmes, we've been very successful over the last 35, 40 years. We have developed on leases from municipalities and be able to develop affordable housing and maintain that affordable housing for 40 years, and now we're retrofitting them, and that's going to be another 40 years. And so that model has actually worked out really well. And the local government is able to leverage their land, and the nonprofits able to leverage other like provincial and federal sources of money to actually provide you with that public good, which is affordable housing at no cost to that to the municipality. So I think there is a equation here that has worked for a long time and I think can continue to work. I do question it just depending on what context and which community it is in, but I do see there's some value here, especially in a community where you don't have a lot of providers and you really need to work on that. Oh, looks like we might have lost Heather.
Oh, now what do we do?
Oh no. Any other folks with comments on this question?
Thanks, Lilian.
Hi, everyone. I'll just jump in here. Heather's laptop battery has died, apparently. Does anyone else want to chime in on this question about the public sector-led housing delivery? All right, seeing none. Let's go to the next question. So this is a legal question. So a local government now must not hold a public hearing if a proposed zoning bylaw is consistent with an OCP. How is the legal principle of reasonable opportunity to be heard carried out with the changes to the LGA? So a question to you, Timothy.
Yeah, I guess I'll take that one. Thanks, Evan. So how is the legal principle of reasonable opportunity to be heard to be carried out with these changes? I'll say something, maybe this is my hot take. I don't think it needs to be, and in fact, probably it shouldn't be carried out. The reasonable opportunity to be heard is coded in the Local Government Act as a component of a public hearing. So where a public hearing is taking place, those who believe they have an interest in affected properties must have a reasonable opportunity to be heard. But because the province has removed the obligation to have a public hearing in certain circumstances, and then gone further and said in other circumstances there is a local government must not carry out a public hearing, I think that they've removed the reasonable opportunity to be heard from those parties. And I know there are some other lawyers who are opining that there really is no technical reason why procedural fairness, which is really what we're getting at here, should even be brought in once the public hearing component has been removed. So that's I'd say that you run a certain risk if you're not supposed to be having a public hearing. Either council's chosen not to have one, or you're being told through the local government that you're prohibited, or the Local Government Act, that you're prohibited from having one. You run a certain risk by trying to give the public a reasonable opportunity to be heard.
Thanks, Timothy. Wow, we are at the end of our webinar.
You're muted.
And I'm muted. Sorry about that. Thank you, Timothy. And thank you for everybody attending. This went really fast. Lots of great information. I just wanted to let everybody know that our final PLN webinar of the year is on December 10th, and we're anticipating it'll be great. We have staff from CMHC and the province to present their respective standardized housing design catalogs. On the wing will be Small Housing BC and Bryn Davidson to offer perspectives on how to make these design concepts a reality. And Ray will be back to moderate this webinar. If you have any feedback about today's webinar, please send a note to peerlearning@pibc.bc.ca, and have a great rest of your day. Appreciate your attending. Thank you, and thank you to all the panelists. Appreciate your time.